Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel for my first motion video. In this video, I will show you how I build a legendary model, the Mercedes W124 Coupe from Fujimi. Before I begin, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to my channel for more content like this. If you enjoy watching, please give a thumbs up. This is the first part of the building process, so if you want to see how this model turns out in the end, make sure to press that bell icon to be notified when I upload a new video. Now, let's move on to the building part. The first step is unboxing. This model is a classic and has been out of production for a long time. From looking at the manual, the assembly process seems quite simple and straightforward. The model is a curbside version, but it comes with a detached bonnet, which is unusual for me since I haven't encountered a model like this before. It's possible that when this model was released, there was an option to purchase the engine separately for additional detailing. In the box, I also found a brochure listing the models that were released simultaneously with this one, as well as those released later. I have seen some of these models for sale on dedicated websites, and I own a few of them in my collection. Starting with the parts, the chassis is quite disappointing as it is the same chassis used for several other models from Fujimi, resulting in poor detail for the undercarriage. The next part is the car's body, which features a lot of details and accurately reflects the real vehicle. Everything is to scale, and the molding lines are minimal, so there is not much sanding required for the body. I am quite impressed by the quality, considering how poor some Fujimi models can be. The wheels are decent, and the tires have good details. However, they will be assembled using an axle, which means the wheels will not turn, and that's a drawback for me. I also don't think they will fit well on this model, so I will likely look for a better set of rims from my collection. Next bag in the box contains the interior, as well as some undercarriage parts and the bonnet with the headlights buckets. I noticed that these parts require some attention. There are noticeable molding lines that will need sanding. The seats have empty backs, which I dislike, so I will need to address that. Additionally, the bonnet grille needs correcting, and I anticipate that the dashboard will likely give me some headaches when I try to glue it together. The clay parts are in excellent condition, and the details of the headlights and taillights are very good. The last bag in the box contains the decals, which initially appeared to be in good condition, but later I realized I was mistaken. Unfortunately, due to their age, they fracture very easily, making their application a real struggle. To begin building this amazing model, I started by removing the chassis from its sprue and test fitting it with the body to ensure everything fit properly. After some initial challenges, I discovered the correct way to assemble the pieces. Everything fits perfectly, so I will have no issues putting this model together at the end. I took a quick look at how the model would appear with the wheels attached, and they don't look so bad. They are just very simple and don't make this model look any special. Hopefully, I will find something better at some point. I will put them back into the bag for now. I took a quick look at the bag containing most of the parts and examined how much sanding and repair work would be required. Some of the components have molding residues, but overall, the details are good, and I believe the model will look great once finished. I noticed that the seats have hollow backs, which I don't like, so the first step will be to cover that area. Typically, I would use Milliput to fill it, but for this particular model, I plan to take a different approach. The bonnet and headlamps have some molding residues, but it's nothing to worry about. I noticed that the grille doesn't look quite right, so I will need to address that. I'm considering using a scribing tool to create the missing lines and some sandpaper to smooth out the sharp corners. A brief fitting test to check if the bonnet aligns properly with the body. The edges are very rough, and I will need to sand them down. The grille, as I said, looks terrible and needs to be corrected. Now I will begin preparing the parts for painting. The first item I must take care of is the back of the seats, so I removed them from the sprue and set them aside. Next, I removed the dashboard from the sprue and attempted to glue it together. After working on the dashboard, I also took the handrest off the sprue and glued it together to have it ready for assembly when the seats were finished. Gluing the dashboard was less challenging than I expected, and after sliding it a couple of times, I successfully joined the pieces together. I sanded down the rough edges of the bonnet. I began with a very coarse file to remove the large molding lines and flatten the edges. I also used this file to create a curve for the grille.
We've been living in sin so long, all the feels are gone. Fella stopped me on the street last night, said everything's alright. Roller coaster, make it through the day alright. It seems your meal ticket is gone, but life goes on. I could never imagine something better. Yeah, right. Now you're cooking.
Using my scribing tool, I carefully marked a line for the grill to achieve a more realistic appearance. I had to be very precise to avoid losing control of the tool and damaging the bonnet, as fixing a scratch like that would be a significant problem.
You seem to easily forget how to place your bet. When every day life gets you down, you gotta steal the crown. Got to own it. Don't bitch and moan about it, please. God forbid you scrape your knees, and it's nothing to sneeze.
Using a finer grade sanding sponge, I sanded the whole bonnet to remove all the marks from the heavy sanding and create a matte surface to help the primer adhere better to the surface. After I finished sanding the bonnet, I began working on the seats, as they had significant molding lines. I started with a low grit sanding stick to eliminate the heavy molding lines, and then I switched to a finer grit to smooth out the heavy scratches. To cover the empty backs of the seats, I used a styrene sheet. I cut a piece to match the shape of the back of the seat and glued it in place. Once it dried, I sanded it down to ensure a smooth bond. Now the seats look more realistic, and I can move on to preparing for painting. I have deepened all the body lines using my scribing tool. This step is essential to prevent the panel lines from fading and appearing unrealistic after painting. By enhancing these lines, they remain visible even after applying a heavier coat of paint. This technique is also useful if you want to include movable parts in your model. Using a black permanent marker pen, I marked all the visible molding lines on the body. This procedure serves two purposes. First, it ensures that none of the lines are overlooked, and second, it acts as a reference to indicate when the line is completely flat and will no longer be visible through the paint. Using a fine-grade sanding sponge, I started sanding the model body to prepare it for primer. I began by sanding all the marked lines until they were completely removed and then continued on the rest of the body. After I finished sanding the entire model, it was time to apply the primer. First, I wiped down all the surfaces using a microfiber cloth and some isopropyl alcohol to ensure they were clean and free of grease and dust. Next, I prepared my primer, cleaned my airbrush, and began applying the primer, starting with the hard-to-reach areas. I learned this technique from a modeler on YouTube, but unfortunately, I can't recall his name to give him credit. After completing the difficult spots, I moved on to the rest of the model, applying a fine layer of primer. I applied a total of 3 layers of primer. The first layer was applied dry, while the second and third layers were applied wet. I used Mr. Hobby Gray Primer, thinned with Mr. Hobby Leveling Thinner. Once the primer dried, I used a fine-grade sanding sponge to smooth everything out. After finishing the primer and sanding, I thoroughly cleaned the model to remove any dust and sanding residues, preparing the surface for painting. The color I chose for this model is gunmetal from Tamiya, mixed with a few drops of smoke from Tamiya to achieve a slightly darker shade. I believe this color will complement the model's beautiful body lines perfectly. I began applying the color using the same technique as when I primed the model, focusing on the hard-to-reach areas first before moving on to the rest of the surface. I applied a very thin and dry first layer, followed by 2 additional wet layers. I began applying the color using the same technique as when I primed the model, focusing on the hard-to-reach areas first before moving on to the rest of the surface. I applied a very thin and dry first layer, followed by 2 additional wet layers. Now it's time to apply the clear coat. I'm using a 2K automotive clear coat that is scratch resistant to ensure my models look new for a longer time. I have mixed the components and started spraying it on my model. First, I apply 1 dry layer, and then I follow up with 2 to 3 wet layers, depending on how the model looks after the 3rd layer. I love using this clear coating because it really enhances the overall appearance of the model. I've tried several solutions for clear coats in the past, and each time I ended up with disappointing results. After I finished spraying the clear coat, I placed the model inside the paint booth, closed the doors, and let it dry for 24 hours. This is the minimal drying time recommended by the manufacturer, but I typically leave it to dry for 48 hours to ensure it's completely dried. The model has been drying for a little over 48 hours, and it is now ready for the next step. As you can see in the video, even with a closed booth, many particles landed on the clear coat, making it look quite poor. Fortunately, this can be resolved with a proper polish. I began by sanding dry with a 2000 grit sanding sponge until I flattened all the raised spots. After that, I switched to wet sanding with 3000 grit sandpaper and, ultimately, finished with wet 6000 grit sandpaper. Throughout these steps, I made sure to avoid sharp edges to prevent sanding through the clear coat and damaging the paint. Sanding isn't my favorite task, but it can be quite rewarding. There's something satisfying about watching a paint job that initially appears rough and uneven, making you wonder if you'll have to start from scratch, transform into a beautifully smooth and flawless finish. As the coarse grit of the sandpaper removes imperfections, the surface starts to reveal its true potential, and you can almost feel the piece coming to life under your hands. It's a reminder that patience and persistence can lead to impressive results. The side panels present a challenge because of their uneven surfaces, which require a delicate touch during the sanding process. I need to be especially mindful to avoid oversanding, as I don't want to accidentally wear through the paint and expose the underlying plastic. This careful approach ensures a smooth finish without compromising the panel's integrity. After I finished sanding the entire model with fine grit sandpaper to ensure a smooth surface, I began the polishing process using a heavy cut compound along with a coarse polishing pad. In this initial step, I applied the compound in circular motions to effectively remove any remaining imperfections and scratches from the surface. After several rounds of polishing, I achieved a satisfactory finish that highlighted the details of the model. Next, I switched to a softer polishing pad and a fine polishing paste. This transition allowed me to refine the surface further, enhancing its gloss and clarity. The results were great. The model began to shine better than I had expected, revealing its colors much more vividly than before. Thank you for watching the first part of the building process of this model. I would greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video, as it would help me a lot. I also invite you to leave a comment sharing your thoughts on the model and the building process. Constructive criticism is always welcome. I'm not a professional in this field, so I'm constantly learning and would appreciate any advice or guidance you may have. I apologize for the video quality, as I just bought my phone and am still experimenting with its camera. I assure you that my next model video will have much better quality. With that said, I want to thank you once again and invite you to join me for the second part on my channel. Have a great day and see you soon.